Hello, and welcome to the Workplace Makers podcast, where we're helping workplace decision makers to create workplaces where people are attracted to being there and doing fantastic, productive work. My name is Nina Fountain. I'm the podcast host, and today I'm behind the microphone sharing some content with you that I've prepared for a client. And this is around the top 3 moments that matter in the hybrid workplace when it comes to collaboration specifically. So I did this work recently for a retirement villages company in New Zealand, and what I love is that the retirement village founder wanted to create a retirement community where his family could be proud to call it home for his nana. In the way he said it, there's got to be a better place for nana. That was his motivation after seeing her in a cubbyhole in her current residence. And it's quite moving actually to see the tear in his eye as he shares this story on a video on the company website. He wanted other nanas also to have that same dignity that he wanted for his nana. And this is the beauty of bringing design to life. It can really lift us up. And there's a saying in Te Reo Māori, which is the local language here in New Zealand, Hai pikinga waiora, if you'll forgive my pronunciation, but I believe a direct literal translation is something like with ascending health. And it's been translated into English as healthy lives and enhancing well-being. And this is the power of great design. But development can get tricky and knotty, and that whole design process can be completely misunderstood as being romantic, even beautiful. You hear people say things like, not to me, but to designers, oh, you're a designer. Tell me, do you get to choose the cushions? And it all sounds very pleasant and undemanding. But in reality, there are thousands of decisions to make in that process. And then to take those designs through to construction until the final completion date is actually like managing a giant set of dominoes and just trying to make sure that one thing is not going to topple the whole set over and set off a tragic cascade. So not only is the development process hard to manage, but in any design and development process, we're also dealing with worlds of complexity sitting in front of us, behind us, in our cubicles or at our desks at work and inside us. And that's because, as Krista Tippett has said, black holes are in their way explicable, but the simplest living being is not. So the simple fact is we're human, and in biology, nothing is clear, everything is too complicated, everything's a mess. And just when you think you understand something, you peel off a layer and find deeper complications underneath. And that's from science writer Richard Preston. So it does mean that we don't know exactly what to expect next out of someone's mouth. It can take a lifetime of living with someone before you might be able to finish each other's sentences. But for everyone else, we have the constant, somewhat unwelcome magic of being surprised. And if you've ever had a moment of thinking, I really wasn't expecting that, or how did I end up having this conversation, then you can chalk one up to being beautifully human. Oh, for myself, I find this fascinating, and I actually grew up loving words. I will admit that I did used to read the dictionary as a child, and I ended up doing an honours degree in the applied science of communication. There's a love of languages that runs through my family way back to the mid 1800s. A lot of translators and interpreters, and I have acquired that love as well. And so when I think about this challenge of communicating clearly and that we really need to do that in our collaboration settings, I realized just how important it is that we understand a few things about communication. And so I had an experience recently that I thought might demonstrate this nicely. And my husband and I received a long rectangular flat packed box the other day. It filled the hallway and you could barely walk around it. And I personally quite like a bit of flat pack construction, if you can call it construction when all you're doing is screwing pieces together. I did help my dad do some building growing up, and it's fun to use the very few tricks that I know. But I wasn't sure what to expect in this case because when we constructed our last piece of furniture several years ago, a bookshelf like this one, the situation descended into a serious argument, unfortunately, and names were called headstrong, stubborn, you're not listening. And I abandoned the project in a huff and left Jeff to it. And overall, it took hours, much longer than it should have, which I think is obviously because I wasn't involved long enough, but that remains to be seen. So it was a painful experience. This time I scissored open the long rectangular box and we surveyed its contents together. I found all the pieces and together we agreed on the first two pieces to work with. I asked Jeff, could he lift a large piece for me? Could you lift it from the middle? I said, and he did. And then he said, I think we should start from the bottom, and we did. And when it came time to move the bookshelf into place, Jeff said 1, 2, 3 to lift. And then we said 1, 2, 3, and we lifted at the same time. And it was a dream. We were team working like clockwork. But as a result, after an hour or so, this flat packed box went from something that got in our way to a piece of furniture that usefully holds about 70 books in the corner of the room, and an orchid and 2 antique spoons. So I'm really not only proud of the creation, all the blood, sweat, and tears that it took to screw in those few screws, but of us working as a team, and we proved something about teamwork. We achieved the teamwork because we did the words work. We wouldn't have been able to work together as a team without an exchange of words that helped us both get what we wanted. That teamwork, together with communication, intersected to create collaboration. And right now in the workplace, many professional roles where people are across the country and across the world, where people are dealing with much more complex problems than constructing a bookshelf, are realizing that the work of exchanging meaning to be able to work together faces a few challenges. And so there are two that are really obvious, and that is social cues. One of my colleagues, in fact, a guest on this podcast, Chris Pop, we just did a recent podcast, a fantastic one on the 5 mistakes that are emerging for leaders in hybrid workplaces and hybrid teams. Really recommend checking that out because he provides such clear insights and data around the experience for leaders, and those 5 mistakes are extremely useful and valid to look at. And in his view, leaders are most challenged with social cues. So the lack of social cues is the biggest challenge for leaders at the moment. The second one I would say is the availability of information, whether it's available, where it's available, and how it's available. And it can sometimes be harder to access that data, the concepts, the updates, and sometimes those subtleties that you need. And it does obviously require us to think through how we're going to manage these challenges. And remote and flexible work styles have a great number of advantages. They seem here to stay. So that makes this pause on collaboration in the flexible and remote workplace a valuable place to stop. So let's zoom in a little on remote collaboration. Just push out on that mental iPad screen, so to speak, and see what is going on here. What are the moments that matter in this overall picture of remote work? And how can we therefore collaborate more effectively in remote settings and across the country and across the world? So there are 3 moments that particularly matter. And these are the interactions throughout our days and our weeks that particularly add value to our work and to ourselves personally. And when we manage these moments instead of leaving them to chance, we can realize the potential in remote work through a better performance in ourselves and in others. And these 3 are, in my experience, the 3 that really stand out in 10 years of helping leaders and teams to manage flexible and remote work. And so each of us has different work to do. You might relate to 1 or 2 of them, maybe all of them. But I see them like a map. So there's a physical correlation to each of these. And firstly, we can talk about meetings. And so meetings are where we often share updates, create change, swap culture. And when meetings work well, information flows, people have the freedom, the opportunity to participate, tensions and frustrations are minimal, and people can get on with their work productively. And this is why a meeting is a moment that matters. So I picture meetings happening in offices mainly, the work office and our home office. You might have another location that you use for meetings. Secondly, everyone who is not a robot values the opportunity to connect with other people in some way. And when people have and create opportunities to connect genuinely, person to person, peer to peer, relationships can be maintained, that social capital can be built, and the trust and confidence that we feel in our peers can help us do great work. I think of opportunities to connect as happening in the hallways and maps the lounge areas, and in fact, anywhere where we can bump into each other and be doing something that is not work, but alongside each other. Thirdly, conversations in general are the engine of good work. And important conversations are particularly important to manage well. And by those, I mean sophisticated concepts or subtleties needing to be conveyed or dealing with a significant issue. So think stakeholder management, think learning and upskilling, adapting, being responsive, and trust building. So, when those important conversations happen easily, then problems can be solved sooner rather than later. The speed of work increases and stress goes down. So, an important conversation is the third moment that matters. And I would love to hear from you if you think there are other really significant moments that matter in a collaboration across the hybrid work week. But if we can master these, then we can really achieve truly wonderful things. And if we can improve even just one of them, then we'll see and feel the benefits. An ancient African, I must admit, proverb comes to mind. Not that I have any African connections, but I love this proverb. If you want to go fast, go alone. And if you want to go far, go together. And more recently, Steve Jobs, who we know much more closely, had this comment: great things in business are never done by one person, they're done by a team. And so there are, imagine that you were looking at a pile of random picture cards. What are the chances that you would name each card in the same way that your neighbor would name that card? And the chances, I can almost guarantee you, would be very small, except for the most obvious of symbols. So we say a word and it sounds linear. It sounds simple, like it's a collection of sounds that symbolizes and communicates a meaning. It sounds like there's a one-to-one connection between the word and its meaning. But in reality, words are like picture cards. Their meaning is defined by the user. And that means they can very often mean different things to different people. Not always, but often enough to make words less than perfect. Words are not automatic, they're not formulaic, they're not scientific. And that's coming from someone with an honours degree in the applied science of communication. So that makes collaboration, where teamwork is enabled by communication, less like a chemical formula where one hydrogen atom and two oxygen atoms equals H2O every time, and more like an experiment where we add a few key ingredients, but we still don't know exactly what is going to happen. So there can be a great deal of uncertainty in communication. But we have nothing to fear about this because we're in great company, even amongst scientists. And Albert Einstein said, I believe in intuitions and inspirations. I sometimes feel that I am right. I do not know that I am. So some of that uncertainty that we're scared of is actually part of the process of arriving at something truly wonderful. Yes, the uncertainty comes from the variable meanings of words, but there's also another source to it. And in that usual course of our work, the problem is we don't have time to slow down. We're moving fast, there are deliverables, and meeting the deadline is critical. We don't have time to really look and understand the full context of a story that's unfolding before us. We don't benefit from these present, invisible layers of meaning that are invisible to us because we're moving so fast. And so that's the other challenge that we face. That words are variable, but also we're moving too fast to really understand the context. And text-based communication like emails, lines on a spreadsheet, texts are not rich communication in linguistics terminology. They're not loaded with the layers of meaning that help us flesh out the context and understand it. Emails, texts, and one-liners are the equivalent of a quick glance at a photograph. They serve a purpose, but let's be clear, that purpose is just a quick update or an information swap. It's not the same as what we can achieve in a discussion, a meeting, or a conversation. Those are more like the equivalent of slowing down to do a detailed drawing. So in remote work, it can be really hard to build those layers of meaning We have to instead be smart enough to realize that text based information is only scant and surface level. It's not rich with context. It's missing a whole lot of cues and pointers that would help us understand what's really going on. And to get to those rich layers of meaning, we actually need to flip the way we communicate more often than we do. And that is that we need to talk on the phone, on Teams, or in some other way, person to person, even face to face and in the same location. That means slowing down long enough to have the meetings, to connect, and to be in conversation, to have a real time exchange of ideas where the person's voice and face can provide you with context. So, I don't have an opportunity to ask you right now what your day has been like, but I imagine if I asked you a question and you gave you 10 seconds to reply, there'd be a huge amount missing. And if you and I had to work together and I didn't know a lot around the drivers of why you've made a decision, I didn't know that there was more to the update than I allowed you time for, then I'm going to miss a huge amount of context, and that could be important. And that could be the difference between success and failure. So, the magnificent Leonardo da Vinci said that simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. And at its simplest form, what I'm really saying is firstly, slow down, and secondly, talk person to person. So, how can we apply this insight to these three top moments that matter in hybrid workplaces for collaboration: meetings, connection, and important conversations? The English scientist Francis Bacon said a prudent question is one half of wisdom. And even though that advice is around 500 years old, there's something to it. So let's see how each of these moments can be built by context, and how a question can be the door to opening that effective collaboration. Say we're in a Teams meeting together and we see someone has arrived. Sorry, they haven't arrived, and for all we know, this there may be something terrible that's happened, or it may be really benign, um, and hopefully that doesn't happen very often in your team. But when it does happen, we notice it and we start wondering about the circumstances of why that person's late. And if they don't explain their circumstances when they arrive, then we're left to make up our own story. So instead, what question could we ask that would change this? Well, we could make a habit across the team, a new norm of asking people who are late to fill in the blanks. It just takes a conversation with the team to set it up. So your question might be, we're all trying to be on time when we're not. It can be confusing for people, and that can raise questions, and we might end up doubting each other. So are we all willing to explain why we're late if we ever are? Then you've got a decision from your team, you've got agreement, you've started a discussion. And we all need to know why, the full situation. And if we don't, the mind makes up its own stories. So a question helps us to fill in the context, and it resolves one of those key distractions in the meeting. So let's look at the next moment that matters: connection. Say you started a project a couple of weeks ago with a new colleague, and up until now, the work has been going really well. But you notice that you haven't built a lot of social capital and there's been no time. It's time to slow down at this point and suggest an opportunity to connect. For example, you could set up a time to swap stories of similar projects to boost your knowledge of each other's experience and share your insights into this project. Your question might be, would it work for you for us to have a more general conversation about this project and others to see what we can learn from each other? So, building that shared context together is powerful for helping us connect. And just sharing our stories with each other is an amazing way to do this. And so you can see, for that second moment that matters, a question opens the door and context is really key. But it's just worth saying as an aside about connection for a minute or two, that we have this blind spot about connection due to our fascination with achievement. We can be focused on the mechanics, the graphs, the layouts, the plans, the spreadsheets of the things that we're doing, and that is noble. But if we don't spend some time connecting person to person, then we can easily undermine all our efforts. And this can be proven, or I guess as an observation, something that we should think about here, from the primate closest to us. So, did you know that chimpanzees spend 15% of their time in activities that build their social fabric, helping each other out with fleas, cleaning each other's hair, and they apparently care a lot about their hair. So, this makes grooming a very important social interaction for chimpanzees. It's used to maintain status, to build friendships, and to keep close bonds. And our human equivalent might be shooting the breeze, finding out what's happening for someone, offering them help, and spending relaxed time in each other's company. These types of interactions, however, are by nature informal, and that makes them a little bit weird to replicate online, which means that sometimes when people are 100% remote, those connection moments aren't happening at all, but they are critical, and formalizing them to make sure they happen is one of the major ways that remote teams get over that challenge. So, say you want to refine the inputs that you're receiving from a colleague as we think about the third moment that matters. Your work depends on theirs, but you see room for improvement in the quality of what you're getting. And this leads to the need for an important conversation, one that needs to be managed sensitively. So don't match an important conversation with the simple, blunt tool of text based communication. Handle it over email, talk on the phone, on Teams or in person, so that you can have rich communication and handle it well. So, your first question in that conversation might be, can you tell me more about the way things work in your team? Maybe you'll discover blockages you didn't know about or opportunities that you didn't know existed. Whatever you do, don't wade into a sensitive conversation without asking a question that helps establish context. Context is critical for helping us to handle these important conversations well. I would even say, if we used to say that cash is king, in collaboration, context is cash. Knowing the background and situation is the cash we need to make a collaboration experience meaningful and valuable. And if instead we only connect, we do that quick glance and we just use text based communication with the smallest part of the situation, the easiest things to see, then it's also very easy to make false assumptions. And it basically comes down to being hard to be good at the moments that matter. So don't assume that you know all the important details. As we know, to assume makes an ass out of you and me. The biggest difference between doing our own work and collaborating is that in collaboration, there's not only the work, there is also the words work, the communication about the work that makes the teamwork go well. And it's a choice we have to, when we understand a situation, to put the effort in to gather more context or not. The famous and successful Stephen Covey said, I am not a product of my circumstances, I'm a product of my decisions. He recognized his power to choose. And so today we actually need to decide, do we want to be more fully informed? Do we want to manage those important moments with more context? Will we decide to slow down and talk person to person? Will we ask questions? What this can do for us is amazing. It helps us to help others. And if we fight over pieces of pie, someone loses. But if we grow the pie, there can be enough for everyone. And when we help others, it may come back to help us one day. But even if it doesn't, we've made our workplace a better place where there are stronger relationships. And I can almost guarantee a lot more fun. Adam Grant, Wharton's top rated professor for 7 years and an acclaimed author, has said, the more I help out, the more successful I become. And in the words of Martin Luther King Jr., life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others? So today, tomorrow, and next week, let it be that we slow down and talk in person more often. Let's get the context, ask the questions to make the most of the moments that matter. Great to have you with me. I look forward to joining you again for another podcast in a couple of weeks' time. Talk soon.